Each of us has a name given by God and given by our parents. Each of us has a name given by our smile and given by what we wear. Each of us has a name given by our walls and given by our neighbours. Each of us has a name given by the seasons and given by our death. Her name was Marinella Beretta. She was a 70-year-old retiree who lived alone in a house in Como, Italy. Marinella had no family or friends. At the start of the pandemic, she sat down at her dining table and tragically, she never got back up. Shockingly, she wasn't found until this February, 2 years later. The tragedy devastated Italy, shockwaves rippling around the world. As the Italian Minister for Families said, "What happened to Marinella? That forgotten loneliness hurts because no one should be alone." In response, over 100 people attended Marinella's funeral. When I read Marinella's story, I was in disbelief. Surely no one could be so alone that their death would go undiscovered for 2 years. The words from Genesis chapter 2 came to mind. Lo tov heyot ha'adam levado. It is not good that a person should be alone. How fitting that the very first thing that God describes as not being good is loneliness. Because we all need people beside us who care for us and know our name. Each of us has a name. Her name was Helga Ederer. She was a Holocaust survivor with a tattoo on her arm. 10 years ago, she answered my High Holy Day call, exclaiming, "I'm blind and lame. I survived Auschwitz, and I want nothing to do with the synagogue." When I asked why, she explained that years earlier, mistakenly, she'd come here to Upper Berkeley Street rather than to the overflow at friend's house. She turned up for Yizkor to mourn her murdered father and brother, but had been turned away. Devastated, Helga went home. A decade later, she was still upset. Determined to right a wrong, I explained that I was a new rabbi and asked if I could pay her a visit. Helga was reluctant until I promised to only stand at her door for 3 minutes. A few days later, after those 3 minutes at her door, Helga laughed, saying, "Well, you'd better come in." We spoke for nearly 3 hours. It turned out that she was a widow and had a son living overseas who visited as often as he could. Most of her friends had died. She was lovely. She was lonely. She had a terrific sense of humor. And having broken the ice, I promised Helga that she would never again be let down by us. And after a few more visits, Helga began attending the weekly Berkeley Lunch Club and was befriended by the volunteers. She loved our monthly tea parties. More about them later. 3 years after that initial phone call, I visited Helga in hospital. When she passed away, I was right there at her bedside, along with her son. At Helga's funeral, many WLS members turned up. She died neither alone nor lonely, and lots of us still cherish her name. Just before Helga's death, she thanked me for those 3 minutes at her door and for giving her back her community. I blinked away a tear because she had given me so much more. Most importantly, she taught me that every lonely person has a story, not just a name. Each of us has a name, given by our walls and given by our suffering. It's 3 years since Most of you last attended in-person Yizkor services. For those at home, it's your third year online. During this pandemic, every single one of us has experienced at least one moment of loneliness. But for some, it has been profoundly isolating. And that is where community must come in, because lo tov heyot ha'adam levado, it is not good that a person should be alone. As John Donne, the 17th century English poet, wrote, "No man is an island, entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. Any man's death diminishes me, because I am involved in mankind." That involvement was demonstrated at the start of the pandemic, when hundreds of you made weekly calls to older and isolated members. Nearly 30 months later, some of those calls continue. What started as communal connections soon became friendships, drawing together isolated islands into a cohesive community made up of real relationships, not just names. That's not to say that people have not been lonely. Loneliness can strike in all sorts of ways: emotional loneliness, social loneliness, spiritual loneliness. All of these might occur on one's own or when surrounded by a crowd. This afternoon we heard Jonah crying out to God from the solitary depths of despair in the belly of the fish. But if you read the Torah, Moses sounds just as lonely, despite being surrounded by the Israelites. The responsibility of looking after so many people leaves no time to connect with them. But the arrival of Jethro, his father-in-law, makes all the difference. Recognizing Moses' isolation, Jethro echoes God's words for the next time in the Torah. Lo tov, this is not good. And then Jethro adds, Lo tuchal asohu levadecha, you cannot do this alone. For Moses to succeed, he must share his mission. Likewise, Rabbi Helen and I need you to share our mission. Just imagine if, by next Yom Kippur, we could guarantee that not one of our near 3,000 members need feel lonely or isolated. Wouldn't that be amazing? It might even be a lifesaver. And to achieve that mission, to renew those connections in ways that make our members more than just a name, we need each of you. And we have a plan inspired by a great man with a great name. Each of us has a name. His name is Trevor Littleton. In 1965, Trevor encountered an elderly lady. She lived alone with no electricity. Saddened that she was one of many lonely Londoners, Trevor contacted the Marylebone Welfare Department. After receiving a list of names, he and his friends visited 12 elderly locals, inviting them on an outing. Shortly afterwards, Trevor received a Christmas card which said, "At last, I have something to live for." Feeling motivated, Trevor developed his idea into tea parties. The model was brilliantly simple: several guests, a few hosts, and some drivers. The whole group enjoyed afternoon tea and, in so doing, got to know more than just each other's names. Before long, even the loneliest of neighbours had something each month to look forward to. Of course, the drivers and hosts also gained a great deal, not just from giving back, but as I did with Helga, from meeting fascinating people with amazing stories. Over time, Trevor's idea flourished. Today, there are nearly 500 monthly tea parties across the UK, organised by a charity called Re-Engage, which Trevor founded. Trevor, a long-standing, much-admired congregant sitting just over there, and probably now hiding behind the pillar, Trevor, you devised a method to reduce loneliness, and in the most Jewish of ways, via food. Pre-pandemic, this synagogue hosted 2 monthly tea parties, which were a highlight for Helga, as was the annual communal tea party hosted by Lady Jane Rain and Robert Lacey in their beautiful garden that so many people look forward to attending each and every year. And recently, post-pandemic, our monthly tea parties have returned, but let's be honest, one tea party for a dozen people will never banish loneliness amongst nearly 3,000. And that is where Jethro's advice comes in, because we, young and old alike, need to take on this mission together. We've done it before. Heading into our first lockdown High Holy Days, we established local distribution hubs. Prayer books were dispatched, and 70 of you delivered them to your neighbours, some even discovering that long-standing next-door neighbours were closet members of this synagogue. Through working together, we remained connected despite social distancing. And that is why across Greater London, we're about to establish 80 neighbourhood groups, each with around 20 households. And for certain activities, several neighbourhood groups are going to work together as what we're calling a super hub. And from early 2023, each super hub will host a tea party every other month. And that is where we need you. I really mean it. We need you. Can you spare one afternoon every other month? Might you be a driver? Are you a potential tea party coordinator, a role that anyone of any age can take on? Or maybe you're someone who would enjoy hosting a tea party. If you're thinking, yes, I could do that, then tonight, after you've broken your fast, please check your inbox and reply to the special email asking for volunteers. Just 6 afternoons a year, and together we could help to banish loneliness. I sincerely hope and pray that within this community there is no one as isolated as poor Marinella Beretta, but I know that there are many who, like Helga, have a lot to offer. We just need to stand outside their door for 3 minutes and learn their name and their story. And if you're feeling lonely, we rabbis would love to hear from you. Please, please get in touch with either of us or any of the other rabbis. Now, whilst there will only ever be one Trevor Littleton MBE, he's hiding again, by the way, there are hundreds of you like him who know that the Jewish value of hachnasat orchim, of providing hospitality, is the way to break down the walls between us. So together, let's create a warm community in every sense, a place where each of us is more than just a name. Each of us has a name. Her name was Zelda, and in 1974, she penned the famous Israeli poem, L'chol ish yesh shem. Each of us has a name. But Zelda, too, experienced loneliness. A widow and childless, she devoted her later life to mentoring young Israeli women, supporting them academically and financially. In Zelda's final years, these women and their families became her community, accompanying her to the very end. How fitting that Zelda's last publication was dedicated, and I quote, to the friends of my soul. Friends, in the last hour of this great day of atonement, I want each of us to ask ourselves, what can I do to help turn this room full of names into my Kehillah Kadoshah, my holy, interconnected community, a caring place where no one need be lonely. Each of us has a name. Gemar Chatima Tova. May our names be sealed in the book of life. Amen.